I'm Robert Elstein, and I'm running for Brooklyn Borough President.
Cool. Why are you running for Brooklyn Borough President?
Well, I've lived here my whole life. I'm a teacher in Brooklyn. Both of my kids are in public schools. I feel like I have a really close connection to everyone who's here in Brooklyn. And I have a lot of unique and I think original ideas that would benefit everyone in the race to try to adopt them.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your background. So you said you were in Flatbush now. Are you born and raised in Flatbush?
Yeah, born and raised in Flatbush. I went to PS 139, which is the local public school. My daughter also goes there. I went to Edward R. Murrow High School, where I am currently a teacher now for 16 years. I also went to Brooklyn College for graduate school to get my teaching license. And I'm a writer, I'm a playwright, I'm a director. I direct musicals at Murrow, where I teach, Edward R. Murrow High School. I'm a published poet. I feel like, a teacher or an artist would make a wonderful borough president because we're very empathetic and we can understand when we're communicating with somebody, what their actual needs are beyond maybe what they're telling us.
So you mentioned you are a dad. So what about the Brooklyn you grew up in would you want to change so that your daughter is growing up in a better Brooklyn?
Well, one of the most important things to me is, nature and art and, trying to explore how we can improve our landscape and how we can use art to solve a lot of the crises we're in right now. So, the one thing that I've noticed about Brooklyn and, my time here is there's, quite a number of artists, quite a number of writers, but it's not really reflected in the landscape. We do have some amazing murals in Bushwick, but in most parts of the borough, we don't have that ability to express ourselves that way. So one of the things that I'd like to do is to turn Brooklyn into the world's largest public art gallery, not just as a way to support the artists, which obviously is very important, but because it can positively impact our mental health. It will make it more likely that we'd want to go out in our community and engage with our neighbors and just kind of, improve our lives in terms of mindfulness and wellness and our ability to create.
Talk to me a little bit about some of those policies that you were mentioning. So I understand that some of them are, I would say, a little bit more radical than your opponents.
Public art is one way to resist gentrification. It's a way for artists to communicate a message. It's a way for, a neighborhood to have, a value beyond, the real estate aspect of it. I think, one thing that I've noticed is I was just walking down Flatbush Avenue today, and there's a CVS at the corner of Cortelyou Road that is, a vacant building now, and it's just been completely tagged over. If a space like that had a mural that was there prior to them going out of business or closing that location, that wall would have likely never been tagged up. It would still be a beautiful mural. And my idea for these kind of murals would incorporate the community. So, for example, a CVS or, a Walgreens pharmacy, which we have hundreds of them, almost all of them have blank walls that are just kind of, invitations for graffiti to be tagged up. I don't think that's the kind of location that, neighbors have grown to love, a blank wall on the side of a pharmacy that's been there for 10 years. What neighbors want to see is that the historic landmarks in their building are being preserved. There's a bank right there, half a block away, which is a 1927 classically designed bank, which, the city has rushed through the process and is now in the process of demolition. Like, it's all boarded up, the windows have been broken, and this is news to everybody who's involved in preservation because they rushed it through kind of secretly. And now it's going through a process where we're trying to get it landmarked, kind of a last minute thing. So yeah, I think that, preserving the landmarks that are here is really key. Working with artists from the communities where the murals will go up is really important. Also working with the business owners or the property owners to make sure that they're involved in the decision and that work with the community organizations to see that the message is one that they're supporting and that they're involved in communicating to us.
What about, so you mentioned obviously you're running for Brooklyn Borough President. So why that office and not maybe another office? Why the Borough President position?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one thing, that's related to gentrification that we were speaking about earlier is ULURP. That's the Universal Land Use Review process. And, before the proposal will go to the borough president or the city council and eventually into the mayor, the community board has the opportunity to ask questions and request modifications and make a recommendation for what that process would be. The problem is that most of the community board members in Brooklyn are appointed as a favor by the elected politicians. The borough president is responsible for 50% or more of those appointments. So I think that, the borough president obviously has the biggest impact on influencing who could become part of the community boards. And I think that the community boards are really at the center of the kind of change that we need to see citywide. At the federal level, we have two legislative branches within our government. In New York City, we only have the city council, and we have these community boards, which over time have basically been stripped of all of their power and influence. So I don't think that community boards should be appointed in the way that they are. I'm not necessarily saying they should be elected, but there needs to be a more transparent and perhaps democratic process for how those members are put in, because if that were the case, the community boards would actually represent the will of the community, and these kind of luxury developments, which are greatly responsible for gentrification, would either be scaled down or be built appropriately. The ULURP review does not allow any concerns about the environmental impact. In fact, one of the developments that went up on Cortellia Road was illegally rushed through the process, and it was never even given the second and crucial environmental review that would have been needed. The community board voted on it before they were really authorized to do that. So, I don't think that the community boards would probably approve almost any of these. Essentially what ULURP is doing, on Cortellia Road is the neighborhood was rezoned in 2009, and the property owners paid lobbyists hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 2 years to try to push this process through quickly. And it's basically a rubber stamp process. They really don't expect the community board to have objections, and the community board rarely does. So if I were running for city council, I might be able to recommend a few appointments for the community boards in my district. But as borough president, I feel like, we can really change the way that community boards are formed.
Obviously something that goes in hand with that, and you did kind of mention a little bit the need for affordable housing how do you plan on creating affordable housing in Brooklyn?
Well, one aspect of the affordable housing that we get with ULURP is it's actually not really affordable, and that was actually why it was created. It was created as a means of creating more affordable units. We haven't actually revised the affordable housing laws in New York City since the late 60s, when we had rent stabilization. We had rent control during the Depression, in the 1930s, and it took another 30 years or so to, come up with rent stabilization. And now it's, more than 50 years since we've had any kind of change. I think ULURP was maybe an attempt to do that, but it's had the opposite result. Those so-called affordable housing in most neighborhoods is actually above market rate because it's linked to AMI, which is the average medium income or annual medium income. And that is really not reflective of, a block by block median income. It's more of a regional median income. So a affordable unit in a typical working class neighborhood is not going to be any less than a unit in a more high income neighborhood.
So what you're saying is you would change the AMI rules or look to change them?
Yeah, I would certainly try to influence, the changing how you are worked. I really think though with the environmental impact of any construction, we need to really consider whether we need to make these developments. There's lots of buildings that could be rehabilitated and renovated. They could be taken over by housing preservation and development, and those could be turned into low income housing for families. Most of the affordable apartment units in these developments are studio apartments or one bedroom apartments. They're for single people in their 20s or 30s with a lot of disposable income. We need low income housing for families more than we need market rate apartments for middle class single New Yorkers.
In a Brooklyn that you want to help create, how would you go about, smoothing out that dynamic?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways. I mean, one is we need to kind of create a commission where the community is kind of studying how to improve our security situation in the neighborhoods and also how to reimagine the schools. I think we can probably do that with a single commission. I think that for neighborhood security, the police department probably could be serving us better if they were more like teachers, if they were more like educators. Instead of walking around the streets in the kind of uniform that they're in, something that would show them to be more approachable instead of having a weapon or some sort of militarization with them, maybe a clipboard that has information about resources for the city. I think that if we reimagine security, we could have officers on the street who are there to help people, who are there to educate, to inform, to help with the involvement of community organizations. I've been involved in a number of neighborhood cleanups recently. This weekend, I had 60 volunteers on Sunday and about 70 on Monday in Kensington and East Flatbush. And we cleaned up over 3,000 gallons of trash off the streets. And I think those are the kinds of initiatives that we could have some assistance with from a reimagined police department.
You're saying
I remember,
create more people that walk around with information or replace the people that are already, so maybe like community affairs officers, you're saying.
right, yeah, like, do all of the officers that are employed have to have, the same kind of role of, enforcement of crimes? Could the officers have a different role? One thing that people have talked about is defund the police. I think this is a kind of initiative that would actually increase the funding for security for several years until there was, some kind of reform in both security and education. And the end result, I don't think cutting funding is a solution for anything. We have to just fund our programs wisely, and we're not going to do that without community input. When I was a student at PS 139, probably in second or third grade, some officers came into our classroom, in uniform with their weapons and, a briefcase, which they opened and showed us all of the different kinds of narcotics that are available on the street. And it was like none of us in third grade had ever even considered, you know, trying drugs or buying drugs from someone. And, if instead of that, the officers had come in and tried to teach us a lesson about how we could be part of our community, how we could serve the community. I think that's the sort of vision that I have is, the police should be welcome into classrooms, but the curriculum shouldn't be scare tactics or, informing us about things that are really inappropriate at that age.
Obviously, small businesses are suffering like they have never before with the pandemic. And now, with hopes of a vaccine, people are not necessarily optimistic, but I'd say maybe a little bit more increasingly optimistic that things will get a little bit closer to normal. How would you go about helping the local mom and pop shops? I know the borough president has particular funds that they can designate to that. Would you decide to use that for helping small businesses?
Uh, well, yeah, of course. One thing that I'm just curious about is, why does everyone call them small businesses? You know, I mean, mom and pop seems to be like a really great term. Family business, aspiring business. I think that the term small business is probably something that was created and promoted by large businesses as a way to keep family businesses from competing with them. So, you know, when I talk about businesses, I'd rather call them family or aspiring businesses. And, you know, for any family or aspiring business, there are thousands of others very similar to them within Brooklyn. So as borough president, I would create a panel of business owners to meet once a month to discuss with me all of the issues that they're facing in their industry and also in their neighborhood, the issues that their customers are facing. And I would also create a mentorship program for aspiring entrepreneurs. That's also something that I think would help, you know, stop gentrification, because you know, a lot of the issue is that we don't have the resources within our communities in order to inspire and guide young entrepreneurs. You know, that also comes, you know, closely in with the curriculum of the schools. You know, our schools under Bloomberg, you know, really shifted focus away from vocational education. They really put the focus on, you know, college as like the only option. And, you know, for many students, the loss of the vocational education programs is the reason why they're moving out of the city. And I think that if we have more skills as a society, that's probably the best weapon against gentrification. And if we can, um, you know, use the resources that we have with, you know, other business owners who can help young business owners or aspiring business owners, then we'll have a really strong economy.
When you mentioned you want to ban dirty real estate, can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah. As you know, I don't think we need to really build anything at this point, but you know, if a community needs a certain type of structure to be built, I think it needs to be environmentally sensitive. I think that it cannot contribute to climate change in any way. You know, we have a lot of technology that we can use, solar power, green roof technology. You know, if a developer, you know, is going to create a development that they're saying is contributing something positive to our neighborhood, it also needs to contribute something positive to the globe. So what I mean by dirty real estate is real estate that's having a negative impact on our environment. And it's not just, you know, once the building is built, does it have a zero carbon footprint? You know, the materials are being shipped from overseas. There's a very major environmental impact on the construction on the neighborhoods. So, you know, just to like have a structure that's not contributing to climate change from the moment it's built isn't even really enough. They need to be built using green technology and renewable resources.
You mentioned on your website that you previously pledged not to spend more than $1,000 of your own money, and then it also writes beneath that instead you had now decided to accept donations to spend, I would assume, based on the campaign finance records that have been published, more than $1,000. So what was behind that decision, and why do you stand by that decision now?
Well, you know, when I first started out my campaign, you know, I didn't know exactly what the response was going to be. You know, I kind of kept it you know, close to myself. And, you know, so when I announced it, you know, I thought, oh, you know, if my friends are supportive of this, then, you know, I've got something going. And the support that I got was overwhelming. And I realized that there were a lot of ways that I could support the artists of Brooklyn and support a lot of the organizations that are working hard to make Brooklyn a cleaner place if I were to do the fundraising. So I did, you know, start out as a small campaign. I think in 2017, only one small campaign actually made it onto the ballot. So my objective was to create a grassroots community and you know, that was a success, and pretty much everyone was telling me if we are to do what we want to do before election day, then we're going to need to raise money. And you know what that looks like for me is art on every block, composting centers in the communities that will eventually be turned into community gardens. And I actually believe that we can turn Brooklyn into the cleanest borough in all of New York City, and inspire all of the others, and our neighbors in the next state over, and our neighbors in the next country over. Because the politicians aren't doing anything to address climate change. We're, you know, in the 11th hour of our civilization, but it doesn't have to be. We have a commission now that's creating reports every 3 years about climate change, but our elected officials aren't doing anything at all to address the recommendations of their own study. So I actually think that, you know, it's unbelievable to me that our politicians don't have climate change as the #1 issue on their website. Actually, I think for me, my #1 issue is ending mayoral control of schools, which, you know, for the last 20 years, we've had absolutely no input into the decisions that are being made about our schools. We used to have a chancellor that was working for the students and the parents and the teachers and the staff members of our public schools, instead of a lackey that's appointed by the mayor to do their own bidding. So one thing that is really important to me, um, to hear from any of the mayoral candidates that they're committed also to ending mayoral control of schools and finding creative solutions to make our schools relevant. You know, in addition to not having vocational education, there's very little computer science, there's very little technical education of any kind. You know,
What do
for
you
the
think
last
about
20 years,
sorry to interrupt. What do you think about the
yeah.
mayor's relationship with the teachers union?
Um, it's interesting, you know. At first, it seemed that the teachers union, was really trying to protect the students and the families and the teachers. But that was back in, you know, August and September. Since then, it's kind of disturbing how closely linked my own union is to the mayor, because, you know, they can't even coordinate with the state as to you know, what is the transmission rate that's appropriate to close the schools. My son is in 5th grade, so he'll be turning 11 this year, along with all of his classmates. It's supposedly too dangerous for a 6th grader to go to school, who's also 11 years old. But a 5th grader, in the mayor's mind, is perfectly safe, even though the science shows that anyone over the age of 10 transmits the disease at the same rate as an adult. So there's just no consistency at all. We had a standard of 3% transmission rate that, you know, just magically disappeared.